In March 2016, the British Library announced a project to digitize its collection of early modern manuscripts, one of which is the collaborative play The Book of Sir Thomas More. According to the British Library's website at the time, 3 pages of that play, designated the Hand-D editions, constitute Shakespeare's only surviving literary manuscript. The news release made headlines across the world, such as this in The Guardian, the 15th of March 2016. Here's one of many local NPR stations that ran the announcement. Here's Newsweek. Here's The Independent. The timing was ironic, but while the British Library was announcing its digitization project, Diana Price's paper on the Hand-D editions was published in the Journal of Early Modern Studies. Price is the author of Shakespeare's unorthodox biography, New Evidence of an Authorship Problem. The book's thesis is relevant to the Hand-D controversy. Without the 3 pages written by Hand-D, Shakespeare's biographical documentation does not include any literary paper trails. That is, he left behind no hard evidence during his lifetime that could support the statement that his occupation was writing. In other words, Shakespeare is the only alleged writer from the time period for whom one must rely on posthumous evidence to support his professional activities as a writer. Consequently, Price forwarded to the British Library a link to the just published research paper and expressed the hope that the library would consider issuing a correction. Unfortunately, the library decided to leave its categorical claim on its website. The British Library is a respected institution, and the result of the widespread press coverage is that Shakespeare's handwriting in the Sir Thomas More manuscript is likely largely fixed in the public perception. For more than 100 years, the Shakespearean academic community has attempted to identify Hand-D's handwriting as Shakespeare's. But there has always been a problem. The criteria employed to determine the penman of a questioned document, in this case the Hand-D editions, starts with establishing a control sample of handwriting, the authorship of which must be known if it is to be used by the forensic document examiner for comparison purposes. It also needs to be in the same general class as the questioned writing and as nearly as possible of the same date. The general class rule ensures an apples-to-apples comparison, that is to say, that the writings being compared belong to the same species, that is, signature to signature, dramatic manuscript to dramatic manuscript, and so on. Various Shakespeare scholars have proposed that arguments of paleography, style, and orthography can converge to support the claim that Hand-D is Shakespeare's. However, arguments based on style and spelling are no substitute for the forensic testing of handwriting. Even if arguments based on stylometrics could prove that parts of Sir Thomas More were written by the author of Hamlet, one would still require a valid control sample to prove that the questioned documents, the Hand-D editions, were penned by Shakespeare himself. The penman might have been, for example, a playhouse scribe who copied pages of dialogue for use in the theater. The paleographical argument requires a control sample of handwriting, but in this case, that control sample is comprised of 6 irregularly spelled and shaped signatures. The 6 signatures do not fulfill the general class rule of being the same species as a dramatic manuscript, nor are all signatures actually known to be in Shakespeare's hand. Some authorities explain that some of the signatures were likely penned by an attorney's clerk. Now consider the Folger Shakespeare Library's website on the subject. The Folger reproduces the digital image of a Hand-D edition and headline with acknowledgement to the British Library, but readers who scroll down to the Folger's own editorial section will find the following disclaimer. However, we don't really know what Shakespeare's handwriting looks like. 6 signatures of Shakespeare, found on 4 legal documents, are the only handwriting that we know for certain are his. This is too small a sample size to make any sort of reliable comparison. So despite posting the British Library's categorical headline, the Folger acknowledges the deficiency in the handwriting argument, the absence of a valid control sample. If the handwriting case cannot be proved because there is no valid control sample, then any arguments converging on the case for handwriting cannot compensate for that deficiency. The British Library suffered a cyber attack in October 2023, and the links to the Han D page and blog were broken. As of July 2026, access had not been restored, and previous links to the Han D announcement remain broken. It has therefore proved difficult to pinpoint precisely when the library's language about the Han D editions began to change. But by July 2020, the British Library had added qualifiers to its description of the play Sir Thomas More, catalogued as Harley MS 7368. Significantly, the original categorical claim had been downgraded to possibly and probably. That change was made quietly, with no fanfare, no global headlines. There is more. In the course of recent attempts to locate the British Library's original claims about the Han D editions, searches of their online catalog of publications focused on various aspects of the Sir Thomas More manuscript yielded, surprisingly, Price's 2016 research paper. Price's research paper is not the only skeptical publication listed in the British Library catalog, but as of July 2026, the library still maintains its categorical claim for Shakespeare's handwriting. The announcement made back in 2016 by the British Library has far-reaching consequences. The media headlines legitimize the claim that Shakespeare left behind a manuscript of dramatic scenes in his handwriting, a personal literary paper trail. The academic community has taken advantage of that. Scholars, such as Professor Stanley Wells, evidently assume they can make categorical statements without qualification and without even a footnote. Here's what he published in 2023. His only surviving literary manuscript, the 180 or so lines that he is believed to have added to the multi-authored play of Sir Thomas More. This is the only literary manuscript, indeed the only example of Shakespeare's handwriting, except for a few signatures on legal documents, to have survived. Academia has a strong motivation to assign Han D to Shakespeare. In his preface, A.W. Pollard explained that if it is proved that Shakespeare wrote the Han D portion of Sir Thomas More, then the theories proposing Oxford, Darby, or Bacon as the author come crashing to the ground. There's his agenda, but the subtext is just as significant. If Pollard thought that Han D could settle the authorship question once and for all, then he was acknowledging that Shakespeare left behind no evidence during his lifetime that proves he was a writer by profession. Otherwise, Pollard would not have needed Han D to settle the authorship debate. Shakespeare is the only writer of consequence from the time period who left behind during his lifetime not one literary paper trail, hard evidence that could support the statement he was a writer. The theory that Han D is Shakespeare's only surviving literary manuscript remains wishful thinking.